Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I want you to take a breath, settle into the quiet, and let the noise of the day drift away. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story from a forgotten corner of war, a place where history and nightmare walk together through the jungle. It is a true war story, told from the memories left behind, wrapped in the strange and the unexplainable. These are not stories of glory or victory. They are about the people who vanished between battles, the whispers that soldiers heard when the night grew too long, and the mysteries that the earth itself refused to bury. What you are about to hear happened far from home, during a time when the world was on fire, and men fought in places they could barely name. Some returned to tell what they saw, others did not. But the island remembered them all. I hope this story brings you a moment of stillness, something to think about as you drift toward sleep. Now, let's begin. The jungle never slept, even when the sun dropped and the rain whispered against the canopy. The air kept moving, full of small unseen motions. Corporal Takeshi crouched beside a fallen palm and pressed his hand to the soil. It was warm, breathing. Somewhere far beyond the tree line, the sea roared and faded like a memory he could no longer reach. His unit had been ordered to hold the trail through the valley. Nothing lived here, the officers said, except insects and the ghosts of old tribes. Yet tonight, the forest sounded heavier than before, as if a giant heart was beating beneath it. A shout broke the stillness. Then silence. The men called his name once, twice. No answer came back. Takeshi's lantern cast a trembling circle that caught only vines and fog. A canteen rolled out of the mist and stopped at his boot. The metal was dented inward, as though something had crushed it with a single squeeze. He turned toward the darkness beyond the trees, listening. From somewhere high above came a noise that did not belong to wind or bursted. It was long, low, and wet with breath. The sound of something enormous exhaling. They whispered orders over the static of their radios. The devices hissed, then died. Power lines had been chewed, the wires torn apart like noodles. Someone cursed. Another man swore he saw a shape between the trees, a moving wall of muscle and hair. The lieutenant shouted for discipline, but his voice shook. Every story they had laughed about in camp, about the island spirits, about giants who ate the living, came crawling back into their minds. The local laborers had tried to warn them before disappearing into the hills. The soldiers had ignored them. Now the warnings felt less like superstition and more like memory. Takeshi lifted his rifle, though he knew it would not help. The air smelled of wet stone and something faintly metallic. Not rust, not smoke. He realized it was fear, his own bleeding through the pores of his skin. The rain began to fall harder. The fog thickened until he could no longer see the line of men to his left. He called their names. One answered, half a voice, cut short mid-word. Then came the thud of heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the perimeter of the camp. The earth trembled each time they landed. Even the insects stopped singing. He wanted to run, but training held him in place. He gripped the rifle tighter, staring into the mist. The light caught on something tall and motionless among the trees, its outline almost human, but far too large. It leaned forward, and the sound that followed was not a growl. It was a sigh, deep and sad, like the breath of an ancient thing waking from a long sleep. Takeshi blinked once, and the shape was white. Only the smell remained, a sharp animal musk that burned his throat. When dawn came, the ground near the stream was torn open, the mud scattered in wide arcs. No birds returned to sing. Of the man who screamed, they found nothing except a single boot buried heel-deep in the mud. The lieutenant recorded it as desertion. Takeshi said nothing. He sat in the rain, staring at the empty space where the trees leaned apart. Deep inside, he knew the jungle had taken notice of them. And whatever moved out there in the mist, it was now awake. But this was only the beginning. Rain clung to the leaves like sweat. The men moved in single file, boots sinking into the soaked earth. The trail was gone, washed away overnight. Lieutenant Maury carried the map, though it no longer mattered. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow hid the same unease. Takeshi followed close behind, his eyes darting to the edges of the path where mist gathered like breath on geese. Somewhere beyond that pale curtain, something thrusted. The sound was faint, a branch bending, a low hum, but it felt intentional, as if the jungle itself was watching. They halted when the radio crackled. Static filled the air, sharp and broken. A voice bled through for a heartbeat. It was not English, nor Japanese. The syllables stretched and folded over themselves, deep, guttural, and slow, as though rising from the earth. Then silence. The lieutenant tapped the receiver, frowning. "Interference," he said. No one believed him. One of the privates whispered that it sounded like chanting. The others told him to shut up. Even the birds had gone quiet. They reached the remnants of a small clearing where another platoon had camped 2 nights earlier. The tents were gone, shredded to rags. Supplies scattered, half buried in the mud. At the center of the clearing stood a single bamboo pole with a torn flag hanging from it, blackened by soot. On the pole, claw marks ran deep and parallel, each groove wide enough to fit a hand. Someone murmured that no animal could leave marks that high. Takeshi did not answer. He had begun to notice a smell, not decay, but a heavy musk that clung to his skin even after the rain. At dusk they built a small fire, though every tongue told them not to. The light threw long shapes across the ground. Shadows moved where no one stood. Takeshi sat apart, sharpening his bayonet, pretending he did not hear the quiet conversation between the others. They spoke of giants, of devils with red eyes, of comrades carried off in silence. Someone claimed to have seen one crouched among the trees, too tall to be human. The lieutenant barked at them to sleep, yet he himself stayed awake, hand never leaving his pistol. When the fire died, the jungle came alive. Branches creaked overhead. Leaves shivered without wind. A deep groan echoed from the distance, rising, falling, then breaking into short bursts that sounded almost like laughter. The men froze, gripping their weapons, eyes wide in the darkness. Takeshi felt the ground vibrate beneath him, a slow rhythm, like footsteps far away, but coming closer. He wanted to believe it was thunder, yet the sky was clear. He could feel the pattern in his bones. It was walking, circling. He whispered a prayer. His breath turned white in the damp air. Somewhere to his right, a twig snapped. A shape leaned through the fog, its outline massive against the faint glow of the dying fire. 2 points of red flickered once, like coals stirred by wind. Then they vanished. Takeshi raised his rifle, finger trembling. But the jungle gave no target. Only the echo of breathing, so heavy it drowned his thoughts. He pressed his palms together, wishing for daylight, knowing it would not save them. In the darkness, the voice returned low, rhythmic, impossibly close, speaking a language that should not exist. Morning came gray and heavy. Mist hung low between the trunks, muffling sound, swallowing distance. The men broke camp in silence, faces pale beneath grime. Lieutenant Maury checked his compass, though the needle spun without reason. The jungle seemed to bend around them, guiding their steps in circles. Takeshi marked trees with his knife, but every mark he carved was gone when he looked back. The forest healed itself behind them. They marched until noon and found what remained of another Japanese position, a cluster of bamboo huts, half collapsed, smothered by vines. Rusted helmets lay scattered in the mud. Empty ration tins gleamed like bones. At the center stood a message board, still nailed to a post. The paper was soaked through, yet words could still be read. Takeshi traced the characters with his finger. They formed a single plea. Something is here. Do not stay. The lieutenant ordered a search. The men spread out, rifles raised. But it was useless. No sound except the buzz of flies. Takeshi found a boot lying upright beside the doorway of a hut. Inside, he discovered a torn photograph of a woman and a child. The faces were streaked with mold, but the eyes remained bright. He folded it and placed it in his pocket. When he stepped back outside, the air had changed. The wind carried a faint hum, not quite a voice, not quite an echo. Private Ono shouted from behind the huts. Takeshi ran toward the sound, pushing through ferns taller than his head. Ono was pointing at the soil, where the hut had collapsed. There, pressed deep into the ground, were footprints the size of basins. 5 toes, wide as a man's chest. The edges were sharp, fresh. The lieutenant knelt beside them, whispering disbelief. They measured the depth with a knife blade. It sank halfway before touching bottom. Whatever made those prints was unimaginably heavy. The men argued. Some insisted it was a trick of erosion. Others claimed giants from the mountains had come down to claim the dead. The local guides refused to enter the clearing at all. They stood at the edge of the trees, muttering prayers. Takeshi watched their faces, seeing the fear of those who already knew. When he asked what they believed lived here, one of them answered falsely, "Not animal, not Fathe." Then he turned and walked away into the forest, refusing to return. Night came early. They gathered inside one of the huts, lanterns dimmed. The wood creaked under their weight, and the smell of damp earth filled their lungs. A faint drumming began somewhere far off, a rhythm that echoed through the soil. At first they thought it was rain, but the sky remained dry. Each beat grew heavier, closer, until the hut's walls shuddered with each pulse. The minute stopped. The silence that followed felt worse than the sound. Takeshi stepped outside, drawn by something he could not name. The clearing glowed faintly under the weak moonlight. Where the footprints had been, the ground was smooth, the soil pressed flat, as though erased by an unseen hand. The wind carried a low moan that sounded almost human. He whispered to no one, asking what the forest wanted from them. No answer came, only the rustle of leaves and the quiet certainty that they were being watched. Something unseen moved again that night, and by morning, one more soldier was gone. By dawn, the rain had returned. It fell in thin, endless threads that blurred the edges of the world. The soldiers counted heads, but one remained missing. Private Ono. His bedroll still held the shape of a body, the blanket folded as if someone had lain there only moments before. The lieutenant ordered a search, despite the men's reluctance. They spread out again, forming a line that cut through the mist like a woof of ghosts. The jungle swallowed their voice. Takeshi kept his eyes on the ground, tracing the faint trail that led away from camp. The footprints were human at first, light and quick. But soon they grew farther apart, the impressions deeper. Something had taken long strides beside him, dragging marks that tore through roots and stony. The sound of rain softened until he could hear only his own breathing. Then, faintly, something else, a whisper carried by wind, low and broken, calling his Geethly. He froze. The voice was familiar. Ono's. It came from deeper within the jungle. Takeshi followed it, though he knew better. Each step drew him farther from the others. The mist thickened until he could not see his hands. The voice came again, closer, pleading now. He stepped into a hollow between 2 great trees. The air smelled of wet iron and moss. A shape crouched in the shadows, too large, too still. It spoke once more, the tone wrong, like a record played backward. Then silence. When the others found him, he was standing alone, staring into nothing. His rifle lay at his feet. He could not explain what he had heard, only that Ono's voice was there one moment and gone the next, replaced by something older. The lieutenant marked the loss as desertion again. The men began to mutter. Each disappearance chipped away at their discipline. Fear moved among them now, like a living thing. That night, Takeshi sat apart, sharpening his blade with slow, nervous strokes. He watched the jungle breathe beyond the firelight. The mist pulsed with faint movement, shapes half-formed, never complete. A single long note drifted from somewhere distant, a deep hum, steady, mournful, that vibrated through the ground and into his spines. The men covered their ears, but the sound did not stop. It felt less like noise and more like a warning. The lieutenant tried to rally them. He spoke of duty, of honor, of survival. But every word sounded small against the vast, breathing dark. One man began to laugh quietly until he could not stop. Another prayed aloud until his voice cracked. Takeshi watched the lieutenant's eyes shift toward the trees, and he understood that even command could break. Later, while the men slept in uneasy shifts, Takeshi heard the whisper again. This time it came from Amai. He looked up and saw movement among the branches, heavy shapes swaying where no wind moved them. A droplet of water fell onto his face, warm, thick, not rain. He wiped it away and smelled earth. When he looked again, the shapes were gone, leaving only the sound of dripping leaves. He lay awake until morning, waiting for light, wondering whose voice would call his name next. The rain eased, leaving behind a heavy quiet. Steam rose from the soaked ground, curling through the roots like pale soy. Takeshi sat beside the broken radio, turning its knob out of habit. The device had been silent for days, its wires chewed by something unseen. Still, he hoped to hear a voice, even static, anything human. The jungle had grown too alive, too personal. Each rustle sounded like breath. Each shadow seemed to lean closer. Lieutenant Mori crouched beside him, wiping mud from his face. "No contact," he said. "We keep moving east." But the compass spun again, useless. The maps were ruined, the trails gone. Around them, the forest shifted colors under the weak sun. Greens turning to bronze, bronze to black. The men whispered about spirits that changed the earth, so strangers could never leave. Takeshi did not argue. He had begun to believe it. By midday, they reached the remnants of another camp, American by the look of the gear. Empty cots stood in perfect lines, as if the men had vanished while still asleep. Coffee cups rested upright, full of rainwater. A single helmet lay upside down in the mud. Inside it, a moth struggled to escape. The lieutenant called out, but the jungle returned only echoes, stretching his words into something unrecognizable. Takeshi carried the radio into a half-collapsed tent and placed it on a crate. He pressed the switch. To his surprise, a faint hum answered. The light flickered weakly. Static filled the tent, then broke into fragments of speech. The voice was distant, distorted, speaking in Japanese, but the tone was wrong, slow, drawn out, almost ceremonial. The words repeated again and again. Takeshi leaned closer. He recognized his own name. The men crowded around as the voice continued. The message grew louder, crackling with interference. Then came a burst of sound, a scream, short and raw, followed by silence so heavy it seemed to weigh the air. The lieutenant struck the radio, shouting for it to stop. The device went dark. No one spoke for a long time. That night, Takeshi dreamed of the tent filled with whispers. He saw the radio glowing in the dark, its dial turning on its own. From it poured not voices but breathing, slow, enormous, ancient. In the dream, the jungle leaned over him like a face. He woke gasping, sweat mixing with rain. Outside, the real radio was speaking again. Its light blinked through the canvas, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. He crawled toward it, afraid yet drawn. The tent smelled of wet iron and decay. The radio whispered now in English, words low and deliberate. "We are watching." The light blinked once more and died. Takeshi backed away, trembling. Outside, the men were already awake, staring into the forest. Somewhere far beyond the trees, another voice repeated the same phrase, deeper, slower, echoing across the valley. The jungle had learned their language. By morning, the air was thick as soup. Mist clung to every leaf, turning sunlight into pale silver. The men packed what little remained of their supplies and began the slow march east. No one spoke of the radio. It lay buried under a pile of wet leaves, silent once more. Lieutenant Mori ordered them to keep formation, though even his voice carried less certainty now. The jungle seemed to shift around them. Paths they had cleared only the day before were gone, swallowed by new growth. Takeshi walked last in line. The sound of boots on mud echoed oddly, repeating behind them as if another column followed, always just out of sight. When he turned, he saw only the fog. He told himself it was imagination, but the rhythm never failed to match their pace. Each time they stopped, it stopped. Each time they moved, it began again. The lieutenant paused to rest near a cluster of roots as thick as walls. He unfolded the damp map, squinting at what little ink remained. "We are close to the ridge," he said, though no one believed him. Private Hideo laughed under his breath, a brittle sound. "There is no ridge, sir. Only trees." The lieutenant raised his pistol slightly, enough to silence him, but not enough to hide the tremor in his hand. They moved again, deeper into a valley where the air grew cold despite the heat. The smell changed to less of earth, more of something metallic and sharp. Takeshi noticed scratches on the trunks, long and vertical, as if claws had raked them. The gouges were too high for any animal he knew. The local guides muttered prayers and refused to continue. One of them pointed toward the mountains and whispered, "This is where they feed." Then he vanished into the foliage, gone without a sound. Afternoon light flickered through gaps in the canopy. The men grew restless, whispering about desertion, about ghosts. Then came a noise, not a scream, not an explosion, but a low tearing sound that rolled through the valley. Birds erupted from the trees. The lieutenant barked for silence, but his voice was swallowed by the echo. The jungle shivered. Somewhere far behind, wood cracked like bones. Takeshi looked back. The path they had come from was gone. The forest had sealed itself, roots twisting together, leaves falling like curtains. Panic rippled through the unit. They tried to retrace their steps, hacking at vines, but every stroke only thickened the growth. The air darkened though the sun had not set. It felt as if the island itself had decided they would not leave. Takeshi dropped to his knees, pressing his hand into the soil. It was moving a slow, steady pulse beneath his palm, like the heartbeat of something vast and patient. He felt it answer him, a rhythm that matched his own. Lieutenant Mori fired into the trees, a useless act against the living green. The echo rolled away and did not return. The men stood frozen, waiting for the jungle to breathe again. It did. In one long exhale of wind that smelled of salt and rot, Takeshi lifted his head and whispered, "We are inside it now." The forest did not let them go. The valley held no wind that morning. Every sound seemed trapped beneath the canopy, waiting for permission to buy. The men had slept little, if at all. Takeshi woke to the faint clatter of metal and saw Lieutenant Mori crouched near the fire pit, staring at his reflection in a puddle. His uniform hung loose, soaked and torn. The officer's eyes looked sunken, as though he had aged in a single night. "Form up," Mori said. His voice cracked like dry wood. "We keep east." No one argued, but neither did they obey quickly. Fear had made them slow, uncertain whether command still mattered in a place that obeyed different laws. Takeshi rose last, checking his gear, though he no longer believed it could help. The forest seemed to listen as they began to mine. They followed a stream that twisted between roots. The water ran black, reflecting nothing. The path should have led them toward higher ground, but each turn returned them to the same stretch of riverbank. Hitio cursed, threw his pack, and kicked at the mud. Mori struck him across the face, not out of anger, but despair. "Discipline," he whispered. "It's all we have left." The men pressed on in silence. After an hour, they came upon a clearing ringed by giant ferns. In the center stood a crude altar made of stone slabs, each covered with moss and what looked like carvings. The symbols spiraled inward, looping over each other until the eye could no longer follow. A faint hum filled the air, low and steady, rising from the ground itself. Takeshi's stomach turned. He felt the sound rather than heard it, a vibration that reached his bones. The lieutenant approached the altar. "Religious site," he murmured, touching the stone. "We record it, then Mayu." The moment his hand brushed the carvings, the hum deepened. Birds scattered. The trees groaned. A fine mist poured from the cracks in the earth. Mori stepped back, eyes wide, as if something unseen had gripped his mind. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. They all did. Voices not loud, not clear, but layered like the echo of 100 tongues speaking at once. The words were ancient, stripped of meaning, yet the tone was unmistakable. Warning, or hunger. One of the privates screamed and fired into the trees. The sound died before it could echo. The air itself seemed to swallow it. Lieutenant Mori fell to his knees, clutching his head. He shouted orders that made no sense: to dig trenches, to radio command, to burn the jungle. Takeshi tried to pull him up, but the officer struck him aside. "They are all around us," Mori gasped. "They want us to listen." His eyes turned upward, pupils wide, searching the canopy. The men backed away. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy. The ground trembled. Shadows shifted at the tree line. Mori thus, his pistol shaking in his hand. "Hold your ground," he said, though his voice had turned small. A towering shape moved behind the ferns, larger than any man. The officer fired once, the sound dull and final. The shape did not stop. When the echo faded, Mori was gone. Only his cap remained, resting on the altar, soaked in mist. The hum quieted. The forest stood still again, as if satisfied. Takeshi stared at the empty clearing, the weight of command now falling on no one. He whispered to the silence, "We are not soldiers here." The jungle did not answer, but it no longer pretended not to hear. After the lieutenant vanished, no one spoke his name. It was as if the forest had taken ownership of it. The men gathered around the altar, unsure whether to destroy it or flee. Takeshi touched the stone where Mori's cap had rested. The surface was warm, pulsing faintly, as if the rock itself drew breath. The carved spirals glistened with moisture that was not rain. When he wiped his hand, a faint red stain smeared across his palm. Hideo muttered a prayer under his breath. "We should leave this place." No one disagreed, but the direction of leaving was no longer clear. The compass spun, and even the sun seemed uncertain, shifting its place in the sky. Takeshi marked a nearby tree with his knife and motioned forward. They walked until the sound of water faded, replaced by something deeper, a slow rhythmic beat, rising from underground, steady as a drum. They stopped at a slope where the earth had collapsed long ago, revealing a cave mouth covered in vines. The carvings on the altar reappeared here, etched into the stone walls. The patterns ran inward, leading to darkness. The men hesitated at the entrance. From within came a faint echo, a voice that repeated their steps half a breath late, as though mocking them. Takeshi felt an invisible weight pressing on his chest, a silent insistence to look inside. Against his better judgment, he lit a lantern and stepped forward. The light touched damp walls streaked with moss, and something pale, fibrous, like strands of hair woven into the stone. The deeper he went, the colder the air blew. He found Mark's handprints, large and uneven, pressed into the ceiling as if made by something crawling instead of walking. Each print had 6 fingers. Hideo refused to enter, standing guard outside with his rifle raised. The others followed Takeshi, drawn by fear and fascination in equal measure. They found remains of old fires, blackened stones arranged in circles, and bones long, curved, shaped not quite human. In the center of the cave lay an object wrapped in decayed fabric. Takeshi knelt, peeling back the cloth. Inside was a skull larger than any man's, the jaw lined with blunt teeth like stones. The eye sockets were deep, almost sorrowful. He felt a sound rise through the floor, a vibration that blurred his thoughts. The carvings along the wall began to shimmer, the spirals twisting slowly as if alive. One of the men cried out and ran, dropping his lantern. The flame died with a hiss, plunging them into darkness. Takeshi stood frozen, listening to the echo of footsteps retreating, then another set following close behind. Heavier, slower. The air thickened with a smell like wet clay and iron. A deep exhale filled the tunnel, brushing past his face. He turned toward the sound and saw a glint, 2 reflections catching his lantern's dying light. Eyes enormous and still, watching from the far end of the cave. He stumbled backward, shouting for the others to run. Outside, the forest was silent, waiting. When they emerged, Hideo was gone. The rifle lay on the ground, barrel bent, the earth around it pressed down in wide circular prints. The jungle had claimed another name. They moved through the trees until their strength began to fade. With every mile, the jungle seemed to grow taller, the air denser. Takeshi led what remained of the unit, though no one followed willingly. The disappearance of Hideo Aiva had broken what little faith they had left. Every noise behind them carried a question that none dared to answer. By late afternoon, they stumbled onto a patch of open ground, a rare strip of sunlight piercing through the canopy. In the center stood a shack built from corrugated tin and driftwood. Smoke curled weakly from a metal drum outside. Takeshi froze. A human voice called from within, accented but calm. "You are not supposed to be here." A man stepped out, his beard streaked with gray, a radio slung over one shoulder. He wore the remnants of a khaki uniform, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the emblem of the Australian Navy faded to a ghost. A coast watcher. Takeshi had heard of them, men hidden across the islands, sending reports to Allied ships. This one looked half-starved, eyes bright with suspicion. "I saw your fires 2 nights ago," the man said. "Thought you were gone already." He pointed toward the forest. "If you're smart, you will not go back that way." His tone was not threat, but warning. Takeshi tried to speak, to demand help, but the English he knew felt clumsy in his mouth. The man raised a hand. "You don't need to explain. I know what's been taking your men." He motioned them inside. The hut smelled of salt and oil. The corners stacked with radios, maps, and notebooks. On the wall hung photographs clipped to a string, blurred images of trees and shadows. The coast watcher tapped one with his finger. Locals call them the Kakamura. Old tribe. Bigger than men, older than memory. His hand trembled as he spoke. "I have seen their footprints. I have heard them speak through the airwaves. You think your radio broke? It didn't. They learned how to use it." Takeshi frowned, trying to understand. The man continued, voice lowering to a whisper. "They mimic us. They wait until night, then call the ones who listen. When you answer, they find you. That's why I never reply anymore." He turned the dial on his radio, and static filled the small room, thick as dust. Beneath the noise, faint syllables moved a slow chant. deep and rhythmic. The sound sent a shiver through the floorboards. Hear that? They are always talking. You just need the right frequency. A sudden thud struck the outer wall. The radio squealed. The man jumped to his feet, eyes wide. They found us. Another blow followed, louder, shaking the roof. Takeshi grabbed his weapon, though he knew it was useless. The coast watcher doused the lamp, plunging the hut into darkness. "Don't move," he whispered. Outside, heavy steps circled, brushing against the walls, sniffing. The boards groaned under invisible weight. The noises drifted away. After a long moment, the man lit the lamp again, face pale and damp with sweat. "You can't stay here," he said. "Follow the coast. If you go inland again, you won't come back." He pressed a small compass into Takeshi's hand. "It only works near the sea. Out there, nothing spins right." They left before nightfall. When Takeshi looked back, the hut was gone. Only the smell of smoke remained, drifting through the trees like a memory that did not want to be remembered. The forest tilted toward the sea. Every branch pointed in the same direction, as if guiding them away from the heart of the island. Takeshi clutched the compass the coast watcher had given him, its needle finally steady. Behind him, only 4 men remained. Their uniforms hung like rags, boots coated in gray mud. No one spoke. Words felt dangerous here, a way to call attention from the unseen things that lived between the trees. They followed the faint smell of salt carried by wind. The jungle thinned, but the ground grew stranger. The soil was lined with ridges, shallow grooves shaped like ribs. Takeshi crouched to touch them. The texture was smooth, almost polished. Not the work of water or stone, but something alive. He pulled his hand back quickly. The men exchanged looks, but said nothing. As dusk settled, they reached a slope overlooking a marsh. The air buzzed with insect eggs, thick as fog. Takeshi scanned the horizon. In the far distance, he saw a faint strip of silver light, the ocean. Relief loosened the tightness in his chest. "We are close," he whispered. Yet the moment he said it, the forest behind them stirred. Leaves rustled, low and slow, like a wave crawling across the ground. Private Suda turned and fired into the dark, his nerves snapping. The shot echoed once, then died without return. The jungle swallowed the sound whole. "No more of that," Takeshi hissed. They listened. The men looked toward the trees, but nothing moved now. Only the hum of insects remained. They pressed forward, crossing the marsh in knee-high water. Each step released bubbles that smelled of rot and oil. Halfway through, Suda stumbled. He had tripped over something submerged. Takeshi reached down and froze. Beneath the water lay a wooden post carved with the same spirals seen on the altar. Around it, several others formed a ring. The marsh was not natural. It was a graveyard of drowned symbols. The water rippled, though no wind touched it. Bubbles rose in perfect circles. The air turned colder. "We keep going," Takeshi said, forcing his voice to stay calm. They moved faster now, splashing through the murk until their feet struck sand. The trees thinned behind them. The ocean spread ahead, black and endless. For the first time in weeks, they felt open ski-sleigh, but even the sea looked wrong. The waves rolled without sound, and the moon reflected twice, one image trembling beneath the other. They built a small fire on the beach. Its light flickered weakly against the damp wind. Takeshi looked back toward the jungle. The tree line shimmered, a wall of shifting silhouettes. He could not tell where trunks ended and figures began. "They will not cross the water," one man whispered. "We are safe here." But Takeshi was not sure. At midnight, the compass in his hand began to spin again. From deep in the forest came a single long note, a hum that rose until it trembled the sand beneath their boots. The ocean responded with a soft pull, the tide moving backward, as though the island itself was breathing. Takeshi stared into the dark waves and realized the sound was not from behind them. It was below. The island was not what it seemed. It was awake, and it had learned their names. The sea did not move that night. Waves hung frozen halfway through their fall, each crest glimmering under the moon before sinking again without sound. Takeshi sat by the fire, staring at the still water, unable to look away. Behind him, the jungle breathed in slow, uneven gusts. The trees swayed though no wind reached the shore. Every leaf seemed to listen. Private Suda tended the flames, muttering to himself. He had not spoken clearly since the march. Each time the wind shifted, he turned toward the forest, as if hearing someone call his name. The others lay close to the fire, weapons clutched like charms. Sleep came in short bursts, filled with half-dreams of footsteps and murmuring voices that grew louder when eyes closed. Takeshi rose before dawn. The fire had burned low, nothing left but embers. He walked to the edge of the surf and cuicula. The reflection of the moon looked fractured, as though the water was made of glass that had cracked but not yet broken. He reached to touch it. The surface rippled once, then steadied again, smooth as stone. Beneath it, something moved, a slow pulse of light that glowed blue, then faded. He pulled back his hand. A whisper carried across the beach. It came from the tree line. He turned. Between the trunks stood shapes tall, narrow, unmoving. They gleamed faintly, not white, not silver, something between mist and flesh. One stepped forward. The sand sank beneath its weight. The others followed, forming a line that mirrored the soldiers at rest. For every man by the fire, there was another standing in the dark. Suda shouted and raised his rifle. Before Takeshi could stop him, the weapon roared. The flash lit the beach for an instant. When the smoke cleared, the shapes were gone. Only the smell of salt remained. Then came the echo, not of the shot, but of a cry, drawn out and deep, spilling from the forest and rolling across the sea. It carried a tone of grief more than rage, a sound that did not end even as the dawn crept in. The men packed quickly, abandoning their small fire. The compass no longer worked, spinning wildly between their hands. Takeshi decided to follow the coastline west, hoping to find the coast watcher's signal, or the remnants of another unit. The path wound between cliffs and mangroves. For hours no one spoke. The silence grew so complete that the world felt erased. By midday, they reached a cove littered with driftwood and pieces of metal, remains of a ship, or perhaps something older. Takeshi climbed among the wreckage and found a wooden beam carved with the same spirals seen on the altar. The grooves shimmered faintly under sunlight. Beneath the beam lay bones, pale and smooth, too long to belong to any man. The wind carried a faint voice, the same cadence they had heard through the radio, whispering their words back to them in perfect mimicry. Suda dropped to his knees, pressing his hands over his ears. "They are calling," he said. "If we answer, they come." The others stepped back, afraid even to breathe. Takeshi watched the horizon. Far out at sea, the water bulged upward in a perfect circle, then sank again, leaving a dark stain that did not fade. The tide had stopped for a reason. The island was listening for their reply. The sea glowed faintly before dawn. A pale shimmer drifted beneath the surface, slow and steady, pulsing like a heartbeat. Takeshi stood at the edge of the water, watching the light rise and fade. It reminded him of the radio's signal, the rhythm identical. He realized the jungle and the ocean shared the same breath. Whatever lived here was not bound to one or the other. It moved between them, listening through roots and tides alike. The others waited by the cliffs. Suda sat apart, whispering the same sentence again and again. "They are talking through the ground." His voice carried no fear now, only surrender. Takeshi crouched beside him. "We follow the coast," he said softly. "The water leads us to safety." Suda looked up, eyes hollow. "The water leads us home," he echoed. But Takeshi was not sure which home he meant. They marched until sunlight cut through the fog. The beach narrowed to a thin strip, bordered by sharp rocks. A metallic smell hung in the air. The sand turned darker, littered with fragments of machinery, twisted blades, broken helmets, chunks of metal, fused into stone. Takeshi recognized none of it as Japanese or American. Some pieces were too smooth, others etched with the same spirals found in the cave. At the base of a cliff, they discovered another radio half buried in sand. It was larger than theirs, the casing covered with coral. When Takeshi brushed away the grit, the machine came alive with a low hum. The speaker crackled, spilling out a voice warped by distance. The words came in Japanese at first, clipped and called, repeating orders to retreat inland. Then the language shifted slower, heavier, drawn from somewhere deeper than speech itself. The tone felt ancient. The men stepped back, frightened. Suda leaned closer, entranced. "It knows we are here," he whispered. The radio answered with a long sigh, like the exhale of something breathing through water. The air grew cold. The sand at their feet began to vibrate, tiny ripples spreading outward. From the ocean came a rumble, low and rolling. Takeshi pulled Suda back, slamming the radio shut. The noise stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. They camped among the rocks, too exhausted to move. The night passed without sleep. Takeshi stared at the horizon, watching distant flashes of light, far out at sea. Not lightning, but something moving below the surface. Each pulse matched the rhythm of the buried radio. It was as if the entire ocean were sending a message, one heartbeat at a time. Before dawn, Suda disappeared. His footprints led from the camp straight into the water. The waves lay flat, undisturbed, as though he had stepped through rather than into them. Takeshi found the compass near the shoreline. Its needle pointed out to sea and stopped. He stood there until sunrise, feeling the faint vibration rise again beneath his feet. The island was calling its own back, and now it had claimed another voice. Morning rose without color. The sky was a flat sheet of gray that pressed against the sea. Takeshi stood where Suda had vanished, his boots half buried in the damp sand. The tide remained motionless, refusing to touch the shore. Behind him, the cliffs rose like walls, their faces etched with long grooves that looked less like erosion and more like writing. He ran his hand along one of the marks. The rock pulsed faintly beneath his fingers, alive with a quiet hum. Only 3 soldiers remained now. They spoke little, each trapped inside his own silence. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, but fear fed them more than food could. The beach stretched on endlessly, the same pattern repeating: sand, rock, bone-white driftwood, and beyond that, the trembling horizon. Takeshi felt as though they were walking across the ribs of something enormous, sleeping beneath them. By midday, they came to a stretch of coast lined with broken huts. The structures were old, older than any war. Their frames were made from tree trunks, carved with spiral grooves. The men searched for supplies and found nothing living. No birds, no insects, not even rot. Inside one hut hung strands of hair woven into nets. Each strand was coarse and long, darker than any human color. The air smelled faintly of salt and metal. Takeshi found a narrow path leading inland from the huts. It climbed toward the ridge and disappeared into fog. He hesitated. The coast watcher had warned against returning inland, yet something called to him from that direction. A low sound like breathing through stone. The others refused to follow. "The sea is safer," one said. "Whatever waits there still wants us alive." But Takeshi could no longer tell which side wanted them more. That night, they built a small fire sheltered by rocks. The flame wavered, though there was no wind. Takeshi wrote in his journal, the paper soft with damp. He wrote of the radio, of the voices, of Suda stepping into the sea. Each word bled across the page as if the ink itself wanted to escape. He wondered who would ever read it, if anyone survived long enough to find it. Near midnight, the sand beneath their camp began to sink. It started slowly, a whisper of movement, then deepened into a pull, strong enough to drag stones downward. The men scrambled for footing as the beach collapsed into a hollow pit. Takeshi caught the edge of a rock and looked down. The pit was not empty. Beneath the thin layer of sand lay a network of tunnels glowing with faint blue light. He could see them stretching under the ocean, branching like veins. A gust of wind rose from the opening, carrying the smell of the jungle, though they were miles away from its trees. It whispered through the rocks, forming words that barely made sense. "Go back," it said. "You were not meant to see." The sound faded with the wind, but the pit remained open, breathing slowly. By dawn, the hollow had filled again with sand, as if it had never existed. The others looked to Takeshi for direction. He had none left to give. He could still hear the whisper behind the crash of waves, promising that every step they took was still inside the island, no matter how far they walked. They climbed toward the ridge under a ski the color of ash. The path was narrow and slick with moss, winding between cliffs that breathed faintly with each gust of wind. Takeshi led the way, though he could no longer tell if he was following a trail or simply being guided by the hum that now lived inside his chest. Each step matched its rhythm. Each breath carried its pulse. The two men behind him moved in silence. Their names had lost meaning. They were shapes now, shifting shadows bound to the same fear. The jungle reached the ridge from both sides, its roots clinging to stone like fingers refusing to let go. The higher they climbed, the more the air began to vibrate, carrying distant echoes of voices that rose and fell like the tide. At first, Takeshi thought it was wind funneling through the rocks. Then the words began to form. They were soft, rhythmic, layered one over another, speaking in a language he almost recognized. His name floated among them. He stopped and looked back. The others froze, eyes wide, lips trembling. They had heard it too. The ridge leveled into a plateau strewn with broken statues. Most had been carved from dark volcanic stone, their faces long eroded, eyes hollowed into pits. Some were human, others almost human, their limbs too long, their mouths stretched wide in silent warning. Around their bases grew clusters of flowers that shone faintly under the dim light, their petals the color of fly. The air smelled faintly of rain and something sweet, almost comforting. One of the men knelt before a statue, tracing the spiral carved into its chest. "This is what they worshipped," he whispered. Takeshi could not answer. His gaze had fallen on a single figure at the center of the ridge, half buried in soil. It was larger than the others, crouched as though preparing to stand. The stone shimmered with moisture that ran upward instead of down. He reached out, drawn without will, and laid his hand upon its surface. The vibration stopped. The silence that followed felt enormous. Even the jungle paused. Then, slowly, a sound rose from deep within the stone. Not a growl, not a sigh, but a voice that carried through his bones. It spoke his name again, this time inside his head, calm and familiar. He saw flashes behind his eyes. The cave, the altar, the coast watcher's hut, the frozen sea. They all shared the same heartbeat. The voice told him it was never many place, only one. The island was one body, and he was walking inside it. Takeshi stumbled back, tearing his hand away. The ground shook. Cracks spread from the base of the statue. Dust filled the air, carrying a low, mournful moan. The others ran toward him, shouting, but the sound was swallowed by wind. The ridge began to split open. revealing a hollow beneath, vast and breathing. From within came the echo of countless voices calling together in perfect rhythm. He fell to his knees, covering his ears. The sound was not anger. It was recognition. It knew them. It had been waiting for them. When the echo finally stopped, the ridge stood whole again, untouched, as though the island had drawn a long breath and decided to wait a little longer. Takeshi rose slowly, shaking. He looked toward the horizon where the ocean met the mist and whispered to himself, "There is no leaving this place. There is only remembering." The jungle answered with a single distant sigh. The night fell without warning. One moment, the ridge glowed with pale light, and the next it sank into darkness so complete that Takeshi could no longer see the faces of the men beside him. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of wet stone. Somewhere below, the jungle shifted like an animal turning in its sleep. The sky above the valley cleared just enough for him to see the moon. Then he saw another beside it. Two silver orbs hung in the darkness, one faint and trembling, the other full and still. Their reflections rippled across the wet leaves as though the sky itself were a mirror cracked in half. Takeshi blinked, but both remained. The others began to murmur prayers, voices low and broken. The sound of the island's hum returned, matching the beat of his heart. It rose and fell with each breath, a slow rhythm that felt less like music and more like instruction. He remembered the voice from the statue, the calm certainty that the island was alive, a single body dreaming through earth and water. He wondered if the two moons were its eyes. A strange peace settled over him, heavy but not cruel. The men looked to him for orders, yet he had none. Command belonged to the island now. They descended from the ridge, guided by the faint glow of the double moonlight. The forest opened into a wide basin, scattered with pools that reflected the sky. Mist drifted between them like smoke. Takeshi knelt beside the nearest pool and saw his reflection, split into two. One clear, one distorted. The distorted face moved when he did not. It mouthed words he could not hear. He reached toward it, and the water rose to meet his hand like a living thing. A sudden cry shattered the stillness. One of the men had stepped into a pool and sunk waist deep before realizing it was not water. The surface clung to him like tar, pulling him downward. Takeshi grabbed his arm and pulled, but the substance yielded like muscle. Beneath it, shapes moved, arms, faces, fragments of bodies shifting together in silence. The man vanished without a sound. The pool flattened again, smooth and perfect. The remaining soldier dropped to his knees, sobbing. Takeshi said nothing. He stared at the still surface and saw faint ripples spreading outward, forming spirals that pulsed in time with the island's heartbeat. The distorted reflection of the moon shimmered across them, merging both lights into one. For a moment, he saw a vast figure beneath the surface, crouched and waiting, its eyes two pale orbs that matched the sky. The wind rose, carrying a low chant from somewhere unseen. It was the same voice from the cave, from the radio, from the ridge, repeating his name, slower now, almost tender. Takeshi whispered back without thinking. The forest sighed in answer, and for the first time, he felt it listening not as predator, but as something ancient, grieving, curious about the intruders who had forgotten how to listen. He looked up again. Only one moon remained. The other had sunk behind the clouds, leaving the night darker and more honest. He turned toward the jungle and whispered, "We are still here." The wind replied. For now, morning came thin and gray. The air smelled of ashes, though nothing had burned. Takeshi sat beneath a broken palm, staring at the torn pages of his notebook. The ink had bled from the rain, leaving ghostly lines where words once lived. He tore a fresh page and began again, his handwriting trembling. He wrote to his wife in Osaka. He told her that the war had turned strange, that the island was no longer Earth, but memory. He tried to describe the silence, how it moved like water, how it carried voices of people he could not see. He wrote that he had not felt sunlight in the many days, that time had stopped meaning on the thing. Each sentence grew ofter until his hand paused over the paper. There were no more words that felt true. The last soldier sat nearby, carving shapes into driftwood. He hummed a song so faint, Takeshi could barely hear it. When asked what it was, the man said it was something his mother used to sing to calm storms. The melody wove through the mist, trembling with each note. For a moment, the forest seemed to listen without malice. Takeshi almost believed it could understand sorrow. He folded the letter carefully, sealing it inside a tin can he found near the wrecked huts. He buried it beneath the sand, marking the spot with a stone. "For whoever comes after," he whispered. The soldier looked up from his carving and nodded as though they had shared the same thought, without speaking. By afternoon, the clouds opened again. Rain fell in long silver threads. The sound mixed with the song, creating a rhythm that seemed older than either man. Takeshi watched the water gather around his boots, tracing small spirals that spun in perfect circles. The pattern matched the carvings on the statues, on the rocks, even on the soldier's wooden talisman. It was everywhere now, carved not by hand but by nature itself. That night, they built a small shelter from palm leaves. The wind carried voices from the ridge, distant but clear. They did not sound like cries this time. They sounded like speech, soft and mournful. Takeshi wrote again, though he had nothing left to say. He drew instead the shape of the altar, the faces in the stone, the two moons. He wondered if his wife would recognize him, if he ever returned. He doubted he would recognize himself. When sleep came, it was filled with warmth instead of fear. He dreamed of home, of narrow streets, and the smell of rice cooking, of rain on wooden roofs, of her hands lighting a small lamp by the window. But behind her stood the jungle, endless and green, the spirals glowing faintly on the walls. He reached for her and felt roots instead of fingers. She smiled sadly, whispering words he could not understand. He woke before dawn, heart pounding. The other soldier was gone. Only the wooden carving remained beside the dying fire, its surface marked with spirals. He picked it up and saw that the pattern moved slowly, pulsing with light, breathing as he did. He set it down gently, afraid of breaking something alive. He sat there until the sun rose, the world painted in mist and silence. There was no song, no companion, no war, only the steady hum of the island, waiting for his next word. The rain softened by mid-morning, leaving behind a thin silver mist that drifted across the sand. Takeshi followed the shoreline west, alone now, except for the quiet rhythm that lived beneath his steps. The jungle pressed close again, its edges curling toward the sea as though to reclaim what he had borrowed. He carried little a knife, a flask half full, and the wooden carving that still pulsed faintly in his hand. After hours of walking, he saw movement on the cliffs ahead. A man stood outlined against the light, holding a staff taller than himself. His clothes were rags of woven grass, his skin dark from the sun. Takeshi froze, uncertain if this was living or dream. The figure waved once, slowly, then turned inland. Against every instinct, Takeshi followed. The climb was steep, the rocks slick with moss. Each step carried the faint smell of smoke. When he reached the top, the stranger waited beside a small fire built under a ledge. His face was lined, his eyes calm but distant. Around his neck hung a necklace of shells carved into the same spiral patterns that haunted the island. "You came from the valley," the man said in careful Japanese. The accent was strange, heavy with island rhythm. Takeshi nodded. "I was with the Imperial Army." The man smiled faintly. He handed Takeshi a strip of dried fruit. "The war has left this place. You are still here because it wants something from you." Takeshi hesitated before eating. The taste was bitter and sweet, filling him with warmth he had not felt in weeks. "What are you?" he asked. The man looked toward the horizon where the forest met the clouds. "A watcher," he said. "My father's father spoke with those who lived beneath the earth. They are older than water. They remember everything." He touched the spirals on his necklace. "These are their language. Each line is a memory they want to keep." Takeshi felt the carving in his pocket tremble. The man's eyes followed the movement. "They gave that to you," he said quietly. "You should not have taken it." Takeshi tried to explain that he had found it near his companion's camp, but the man shook his head. "Nothing is found here. Everything is given or taken back." They sat in silence while the fire crackled. Beyond the ridge, thunder rolled far out to sea. "The men who came before you built roads into the hills," the man continued. "They dug for ore, for gold, for poor. They woke something that does not sleep." He looked at Takeshi with a sorrow older than fear. "When they called it monster, it became one. When they called it myth, it disappeared. But it still listens. It never forgets the names of those who speak." Takeshi lowered his head. "Can I leave this island?" The man smiled again, but it was the kind of smile meant for a funeral. "No one leaves. The island keeps what it hears." He rose and turned toward the forest. "But you can become quiet. That is the same as freedom." Before Takeshi could ask more, the man stepped into the mist and was gone. The sound of the fire faded, leaving only the whisper of waves below. Takeshi looked down at the carving. The spirals glowed softly once, then stilled as if satisfied. He felt no terror, only a deep exhaustion, a hollow peace. The sun fell behind clouds, and the world returned to gray. Somewhere in the distance, the jungle exhaled a single word in a language he almost understood. The forest swallowed him again before nightfall. The air felt thicker now, heavy with a sweet scent like flowers left too long in the heat. Takeshi followed the sound of water until he reached a ravine where an enormous tree rose from the ground. Its roots twisted across the soil like serpents, each as wide as a man's waist. Between them gaped a hollow, dark enough to hide a house. The hum that had followed him since the ridge grew louder there, steady as a drum. He knelt at the entrance, listening. The sound came from deep below, pulsing upward through the roots. It was neither mechanical nor natural. It felt like breath. He lit his lantern and stepped inside. The light touched carvings on the inner bark spirals, eyes, lines shaped like rivers. The air smelled of damp earth and salt. He moved slowly, the floor soft beneath his boots, until he reached an open chamber beneath the trunk. There, the roots formed an arch above a pool no larger than a well. The water glowed faintly from within, blue and silver, swirling in gentle motion. Around its rim stood figures carved from wood, half decayed but still recognizable as human. Each one wore an expression of peace, mouths open as if singing. Their hollow eyes glimmered with light from the pool. Takeshi felt his chest tighten. It was not fear, it was recognition. He approached the edge and saw faces reflected in the water, men he had known, voices he had heard, even the lieutenant's calm eyes staring back. The surface rippled, and the reflections shifted into shapes he could not name. He realized that the water was not showing what had been, but what remained. The island did not bury its dead. It absorbed them. A whisper rose from the roots, threading through the air like wind through reeds. It spoke his name, soft and unhurried. "You remember now," it said. Takeshi knelt, the carving still in his hand. The spirals on its surface pulsed in rhythm with the water. He placed it at the edge of the pool, feeling it vibrate once before settling still. "What are you?" he asked. The answer came not as sound, but as sensation, warmth spreading through the floor, a memory of countless voices woven together. He saw flashes behind his eyes. The coast watcher's hut, the radio humming in darkness, The man from the hills, speaking of language and memories, all of them were pieces of the same story. The island was not alive in the way men were. It was a vessel of remembering, keeping everything that touched it. He understood then that his words, his fear, even his breath, had already been recorded in its soil. He could not leave because he was already part of it. The water grew brighter, filling the chamber with light. Takeshi stepped back, shielding his eyes. The glow rose to the ceiling, outlining the carvings like veins of fire. The singing began again, faint, wordless, countless voices merging into one. It was beautiful and unbearable. He wanted to cry, but could not remember how. When the light dimmed, the pool was still. On the ground where he had stood lay another carving, identical to the first, still wet from the water. He picked it up. The spirals were new, spinning outward instead of in. They told him he had been heard. He walked back toward the entrance, the hum fading into the distance. Behind him, the tree closed its roots slowly, sealing the shrine again. The scent of flowers followed him out into the night. For the first time, the jungle did not feel hostile. It felt awake. He walked until morning without rest. The mist thinned into a wide plateau, covered in tall grass that moved like waves. Every blade shimmered with dew that caught the weak sunlight and scattered it into fog halos. The ground felt strange beneath his boots, hollow in places, firm in others, as though something immense lay just beneath the soil. The hum that had followed him for so long was quiet now, replaced by a distant resonance that pulsed through the air like a heartbeat far away. Takeshi stopped at the center of the field and listened. There were no birds, no insects, only wind brushing through the grass, in slow, rhythmic strokes. When he whispered a word, the air repeated it back, not as echo, but as voice, the same tone, the same breath. He spoke again, and the field answered, copying him with impossible precision. He realized the sound was not returning from the mountains or the forest. It was rising from below. He knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. Beneath the thin layer of soil came faint vibrations, hundreds of them, each a separate rhythm. It sounded like breathing, or sleeping, or remembering. For a moment, he thought he could hear speech. Names whispered in broken Japanese drifted upward. The lieutenant, Suda, Hideo, even his own. The island was speaking them back one by one. A shadow passed over the field. He looked up and saw clouds moving fast against the still air. The light dimmed. The grass bent in the same direction, forming perfect swirls that widened outward. Takeshi stood frozen as a low moan filled the sky. Neither thunder nor wind, but something deeper, almost human. The spirals deepened, carving themselves into the earth. He turned to run but stopped. The shapes forming before him were not random. They were letters, carved in the language of the island, a pattern of memory. The ground at his feet trembled, and from within the nearest spiral, a faint glow began to rise. It grew brighter until the field looked lit from underneath. The glow formed outlines of figures standing beneath the surface, silhouettes of men reaching upward with open hands. He understood then that this was not a burial ground. It was a place of remembering, where every step, every voice, every death had been recorded. The men who had vanished had not been taken, they had been kept. The island was their archive. The wind rose sharply, carrying voices that no longer sounded like pain. They sounded like song, soft and endless. The ground steadied and the light faded. Takeshi felt the vibration beneath his feet slow, until it matched his own heartbeat. For the first time, he did not feel alone. He sat among the grass as the sun climbed higher. The spirals remained etched around him, glowing faintly like veins of light. He thought of the man from the hills, of the shrine beneath the roots, of the voice that had told him to be quiet. Perhaps silence was the only offering the island desired. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, letting the wind carry his last word into the soil. When he opened them again, the field had gone still, the grass upright once more. His footprints were gone. The island had accepted them. The sun hung low, dull and red through the mist. Takeshi rose from the field and began walking toward the western edge of the island, where the jungle met the cliffs. The air was still, the silence deep enough to press against his chest. He no longer felt lost, only carried. Each step seemed chosen for him by something unseen. The hum within the ground had faded to a faint memory, but he could still sense it waiting, patient and listening. He followed what remained of an old path lined with fragments of metal and bone. Rusted helmets lay half buried in vines. Torn fabric fluttered from branches like forgotten flags. He recognized insignia from his own army, and others too. The island had gathered them all without care for who had fought whom. The path turned uphill and led to a ridge overlooking a valley drowned in mist. There, he saw movement. At first it looked like smoke drifting among the trees, but then the shapes took form: men in tattered uniforms, silent, walking in single file. Their outlines flickered like light, seen through water. Takeshi froze. They moved without sound or shadow, their steps perfectly synchronized, vanishing into mist and reappearing farther along the ridge. He called out before he could stop himself. The nearest figure paused. It turned toward him, face pale and empty, eyes glowing with faint reflection. It raised its hand in salute. Takeshi's throat tightened. He knew that gesture. He had done it countless times. The shape lowered its arm slowly, then continued marching with the rest. They disappeared into the fog, leaving only the echo of footsteps that lingered like distant rain. He descended the ridge to follow, but found only open ground. The soil was soft and dark, marked by lines that resembled boot prints, though no weight had pressed them. He reached and traced one with his fingers. It was warm, pulsing faintly, as if alive. When he looked up, he saw the valley stretching ahead, dotted with hundreds of such tracks leading toward the sea. The last patrol of the island, he thought, soldiers still walking their endless orders, remembered by the land itself. Perhaps they were not ghosts at all, but memories replaying, the island preserving what it had witnessed. He wondered if he too would become one of them, a fragment, repeating until the end of time. The idea no longer frightened him. He reached the far end of the valley, where the ground sloped toward the shore. The sea was visible again, flat and gray. The tide had returned at last, washing gently against the rocks. Takeshi stood there for a long time, the wind lifting his hair, the smell of salt heavy in the air. He imagined the unseen ranks passing through him, endless, tireless, fading into the horizon. From somewhere above came a faint hum, almost mechanical. He looked up and saw birds circling high, gliding in perfect formation. Their wings flashed silver in the dying light, each turn matching the rhythm of the island's unseen heart. For a moment, he thought he heard his name whispered on the wind, carried by countless voices moving as one. He lowered his head, whispering back, "I am still here." The wind answered with a sigh that could have been relief or farewell. He continued walking until the path met the shore. The patrol behind him faded into silence, leaving only the sea and the whisper of waves folding over his footprints. The island had remembered him, and that was enough. Night fell like smoke over the cliffs. Takeshi sat near the water, staring at the horizon where the last light sank beneath the waves. The sound of the sea was uneven, heavy, as though something large moved below its surface. Each slow surge felt closer than the one before. The tide breathed in rhythm with his heart. He could feel it pulsing through the stones beneath him. He had begun to think the island had accepted his silence. Then he heard it, a low rumble that did not belong to wind or thunder. It came from inland, deep and steady, shaking the sand around his boots. The ground trembled as if something enormous were walking toward the shore. The jungle behind him shivered. Trees bent though no wind touched them. From the darkness came a shape tall enough to brush the lower clouds. It moved with impossible grace, each step shaking the ground yet leaving no mark. The faint light of the moon revealed a figure clothed in shadows and earth. Its skin gleamed like wet stone. Its eyes burned faintly red, not with anger, but with something older recognition. Takeshi did not move. Another shape followed, and another, until the tree line glowed with movement. They were not an army, but a procession, slow and deliberate. The legends whispered by the coast watcher and the villagers had taken form before his eyes. The giants had returned, drawn by the island's pulse. They moved toward the sea, heads bowed, as if answering a call from beneath the waves. The nearest giant stopped before him. Its breath rolled over the sand in warm gusts that smelled of soil and rain. Takeshi lifted his eyes to meet its gaze. For a moment, he saw not a monster, but a mirror, a face shaped by the same fear, the same sorrow. The giant tilted its head, studying him with curiosity. Then it raised its hand, enormous and steady, and touched the ground beside him. The earth hummed. In that vibration, he heard voices layered together, the lieutenant, the coast watcher, the man from the hills, even the whisper of his wife's forgotten lullaby. The voices merged into one single note, deep and endless. The giant withdrew its hand and turned back toward the sea. One by one, the others followed, wading into the water without sound. The surface did not break. The sea accepted them as easily as breath. When the last of them vanished, the tremor ceased. The night fell quiet again, but the air remained charged, alive. Takeshi knelt, pressing his palm to the place where the giant's hand had rested. The soil was warm and soft, pulsing once, twice, then still. He realized the giants were not returning to destroy. They were leaving. Their time in the island's memory was complete. The stars emerged above the water, faint and scattered. He whispered into the darkness, unsure if he spoke to himself or to them. "We thought you hunted us," he said. "But you were guarding something." The wind rose in gentle reply, carrying the scent of rain and earth. He stayed there until the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The ocean remained calm, yet far below its surface, faint glimmers moved in slow procession, like lanterns carried into the deep. Takeshi closed his eyes, hearing the final echo of their steps fade into the heartbeat of the island. By morning, the shoreline had changed. The sea lay higher than before, swallowing half the beach. The palm trees nearest the water leaned at strange angles, their roots half exposed. Takeshi woke to the sound of waves striking rock where sand had once been. The tide moved with purpose, creeping inland like a hand reclaiming what was its own. He stood and watched as foam traced spirals across the stones. Each swirl matched the carvings he had seen under the roots, perfect in pattern. He began walking along the coast, hoping to find higher ground. The air smelled of salt and iron, thick enough to sting his throat. Far out at sea, dark shapes drifted just below the surface, not ships, not islands, but something larger moving slowly beneath the waves. He could see faint light trailing behind them, blue and white, fading in and out. The giants had gone, yet their echo remained. The beach narrowed into a stretch of cliffs, marked by holes where caves had collapsed. Takeshi climbed carefully, gripping wet stone until he reached a ledge that looked out across the bay. From there he saw the coast bending away into mist, each curve dissolving like paper, touched by fire. Villages he had passed earlier were gone, their roofs pulled under the rising water. The sea was erasing the island's edge. A memory stirred of the coast watcher's warning. Follow the water, and you will live, but the water leads home for everything else. Perhaps this was what he had meant. The island was retreating, drawing its boundaries inward until only its memory would remain. Takeshi sat on the ledge, watching the ocean breathe. Each wave came closer, heavier, as if testing the strength of his resolve. The sky darkened without clouds. The light seemed to drain from the world, leaving everything colored in dull gray. He could hear distant thunder that never became storm. The hum beneath the ground returned, softer this time, almost gentle. It pulsed in rhythm with the sea. He pressed his palm to the stone and felt it tremble like flesh. The island was moving, folding itself beneath the water. He gathered his small pack and began to climb inland. The higher he went, the louder the sea became. The sound was no longer crash or roar, but a single deep tone rising through everything, through the rocks, through his bones, through the air itself. When he reached the top of the ridge, he turned for one last look. The entire coastline shimmered with blue light. The ocean stretched far beyond its usual reach, curling over the land in smooth arcs. The glow beneath the water pulsed in wide circles, spreading outward toward the horizon. He could not tell if it was destruction or release. The light was too calm, too beautiful. As the sea advanced, the ground beneath him shifted, tilting slightly. He steadied himself and whispered, "You are not drowning. You are remembering." The wind caught his voice and carried it downward. The water touched the first trees, swallowing their roots without struggle. The forest bent, then stood still, reflected perfectly in the rising flood. Takeshi turned away before it reached him. Behind him, the island sighed long and deep, as though exhaling centuries of breath. The coast was vanishing, but it did not feel like an ending. It felt like something vast and tired, finally going to sleep. The rain returned at dusk, heavy and cold, falling in long slanting lines that blurred the edge of the world. Takeshi walked through it, without shelter. The ridge beneath his feet had turned slick and treacherous, but the sound of the storm drowned his fear. He could no longer tell if the thunder came from the sky or from the ground breathing below. Every strike rolled through the island, like the beat of a heart too large for its body. He stopped when he reached a grove of giant trees, their trunks hollowed by time. The air smelled of sap and salt. The rain echoed against the leaves, forming a steady rhythm that almost resembled speech. Takeshi listened closely. Between the drops he could hear voices layered within the sound, faint, overlapping, impossible to separate. Some spoke in Japanese, others in English, others in a language older than either. They rose and fell with the rain, never clear, but always near. He leaned against a trunk and closed his eyes. The voices grew louder, wrapping around him like fog. He recognized some of them. The lieutenant, calm and stern. The coast watcher muttering warnings through static. The man from the hills reciting the words of his ancestors. Then came softer tones, the laughter of soldiers during training, the melody of his wife humming by the window. Every sound he had ever loved or feared was here, carried by the rain. The ground began to vibrate. Water pooled around his boots, swirling in slow spirals before sinking into the soil. The pattern glowed faintly, blue and white, moving with the same rhythm as the storm. He realized the voices were not separate from the island. They were the island. It spoke through everything, through thunder, through wind, through memory. He was standing in its throat, listening to it remember. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in a single blinding flash. For an instant, he saw figures standing among the trees. They were not soldiers, not giants, but people of the island, men, women, children, all facing the same direction, their faces lifted toward the rain. Their eyes reflected the light, like mirrors. When darkness returned, they were gone, leaving only the echo of their quiet song. Takeshi sank to his knees. The rain drenched him, but he felt no cold. The voices had become one continuous tone, low and soothing. He whispered into it, "If you remember us, we are not lost." The sound shifted, rising in pitch as if answering. The storm thickened until sky and earth merged into one trembling mass of water and sound. He could no longer see the horizon. The island and the ocean had become the same. Through the roar, a single word reached him, a word that might have been his name, or perhaps the name of the island itself. It was spoken once, with the clarity that it silenced the storm for a heartbeat. Then the rain began again, softer now, falling in perfect rhythm. The voices faded back into it, content. He looked up, letting the drops strike his face. Each one carried a tiny flash of light, brief and warm, like the pulse of something alive. The rain was not a storm anymore. It was a message, endless and gentle, reminding him that nothing truly vanished here. Everything was kept. He rose, feeling lighter than before. The forest glowed faintly around him, the air shimmering with unseen life. The voices receded into distance, whispering a promise he could not yet understand. The rain ended at dawn, leaving the air pale and heavy with mist. Takeshi climbed higher along the ridge until the trees thinned and the ground hardened into stone. Ahead rose the mountain that dominated the island, its peak hidden inside a crown of cloud. The hum that once came from the sea now pulsed from within that mountain, deeper and slower, as if the heart of the island had shifted upward to breathe. He began the ascent. The slope was steep, strewn with shards of black rock that glimmered faintly under the new light. Each step echoed, the sound swallowed quickly by fog. As he climbed, the forest sounds fell away until only the rhythm of his breathing remained. Occasionally, he thought he heard voices inside the mountain, not calling, but murmuring, like dreams spoken aloud. Halfway up, he came upon an open ledge overlooking the drowned coast. From this height, the ocean looked like glass, stretched to infinity, reflecting the soft gray sky. There was no sign of war, no ships, no movement. The island had folded the world outside into silence. He wondered if anyone beyond the horizon still remembered the battle, or if the memory had already been absorbed like everything else. The path narrowed and turned through a natural arch of stone, carved with spirals that shimmered faintly with moisture. He touched them and felt warmth radiate through his fingers, the same pulse that had followed him since the jungle. Beyond the arch lay a cavern mouth, breathing out slow clouds of steam. He stepped inside. The interior glowed with faint blue light, emanating from veins within the rock. The floor sloped downward toward a vast hollow, where water dripped steadily into a pool. The sound of each drop echoed like a heartbeat. Takeshi realized he had entered the mountain's lungs. The air vibrated gently, making his chest resonate. At the far end stood a figure carved from the same dark stone, taller than any human, kneeling with its hands pressed to the ground. Its face was featureless except for two deep hollows where eyes should have been. Between its palms, the earth shimmered with moving light. Takeshi approached slowly. The hum intensified until it filled his head, blurring the line between sound and thought. He felt words forming inside him that were not his own. "We are dreaming," the voice said, calm and vast. "You walk inside our memory." He tried to speak, but found no voice. The light between the statue's hands expanded, showing glimpses of the island, the giants walking into the sea, the forest sinking beneath rain, the field of echoes shimmering with remembered lives. The images flickered like pages turning in wind. "All that lives here becomes thought," the voice continued. "You have carried us. Now we carry you." Takeshi fell to his knees. The vibration passed through him like warmth. It was not painful, only final. He felt the boundaries of his body soften, blending with the rhythm of the cavern. His memories unfolded the faces of his comrades, the letters never sent, the lullaby from home. Each dissolved gently into the light until there was no distinction between past and present. When the glow faded, the statue remained unchanged, but a new pattern had appeared across its chest, the same spirals that had followed him since the first night. The mountain sighed once, a deep and content sound, and the mist rolled inward, covering everything. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, touching the summit with gold. The island exhaled, and the world held still. When Takeshi opened his eyes again, the mountain was silent. The pool that had glowed moments before lay still, its surface a perfect mirror. He touched his chest, half expecting to feel the stone pulse inside him. The hum was gone, yet a faint echo remained in his heartbeat. Outside the cavern, the clouds had thinned into ribbons of pale light. The war, the voices, even time itself felt distant now, as though they belonged to another world. He stepped out onto the ledge. The air shimmered with heat rising from the valley below. From this height, he could see the shape of the island more clearly. It was not an island at all, but a vast spiral of ridges winding toward the mountain at its center. Every path he had walked, every river, every line of roots and shore had been part of the same pattern. He realized the mountain was the heart of a creature made of land and memory. Its body spread across the ocean. The ground trembled beneath him. Cracks opened in the black stone, faint light leaking through them like breath from a sleeping beast. The pulse returned, deeper now, moving through the mountain in slow waves. The statue within the cavern began to glow again, the light spreading across its surface. Dust drifted from its shoulders. The sound of stone shifting echoed like thunder under the earth. Takeshi stumbled backward as the figure began to move. The motion was slow, almost graceful. Its head lifted, the hollow eyes burning with pale fire. When it exhaled, the wind that poured from the cave carried the scent of rain and salt. The mountain itself seemed to breathe with it. The hum rose into a single tone that filled the scheme with sigh, shaking the clouds apart. He dropped to his knees, unable to look away. The statue no. The giant turned its gaze toward the sea. Its mouth opened, and from within came a deep sound that was neither roar nor word, but something between song and storm. Across the island, the ground responded. Trees bowed. The ocean churned, glowing faintly with the same blue light that pulsed beneath the soil. The island was waking. For a moment, Takeshi felt terror. Then he understood. The creature was not rising to destroy, but to remember. Every sound it made carried fragments of lives, voices, and dreams stored within the earth. It sang them back into the air, returning memory to the world. The tone grew louder until the air vibrated like glass. He felt his own thoughts loosen, joining the chorus. He whispered, "We are still here." The giant's gaze turned toward him. Its expression, if stone could have one, was solemn and kind. It reached out a massive hand, palm open. Takeshi placed his own hand against the air between them. The warmth that passed through him felt like sunlight and grief combined. He saw flashes of the men he had lost, their faces clear and calm, standing along the shore watching the sea reclaim the island. They were free now, and so was he. The light dimmed slowly. The giant folded back into stillness, settling once more into the mountain. The glow faded until only thin lines of light marked where it had been. The air cooled. Takeshi stood alone, surrounded by quiet that no longer felt empty. He looked toward the sea. The water shimmered gold under the new sun. Somewhere beneath it, the island's voice continued to hum, soft and eternal. He closed his eyes, listening until his heartbeat matched its rhythm. For the first time, he felt no need to move. When the night returned, the ocean was alive with light. From the mountain ridge, Takeshi watched thousands of small flames drifting on the water, moving together like a slow procession. They were not fires. not reflections of stars, but spheres of pale glow rising from beneath the waves. The sea looked like a ski turned upside down. Each pulse of light matched the rhythm he had heard in the mountain's breath. He descended toward the shore, drawn by the glow. The air grew warmer as he approached, carrying the scent of salt and smoke. Waves lapped gently at the sand, and every crest released a new lantern from below. The orbs hovered just above the surface before drifting out to sea. He knelt at the water's edge and reached toward one. It floated closer, brightening until his face was bathed in soft blue. Inside the glow, he saw shapes, hands, face, the faint outline of uniforms. The light was made of memory. The tide whispered as it rolled in and out. Each wave carried more lanterns, each one a fragment of something once lost. A voice, a gesture, a breath. Takeshi realized the island was releasing its memories into the world, sending them back across the ocean like prayers. The air trembled with quiet music, a blend of wind, water, and distant voices singing in harmony. He stepped into the shallows, the water warm around his legs. The lanterns moved aside, circling him, as if recognizing their own. One drifted closer until it rested against his chest. He felt its vibration through his heart, a soft flutter that became a steady beat. Within the glow, he glimpsed the face of his wife smiling, as she once had, beside their window. Her lips moved without sound, but he knew the words. "Be at peace." Tears blurred the light. He whispered her name, and the lantern brightened once more before rising into the air. It joined the others, forming a river of brightness stretching toward the horizon. He watched until the lights merged into a single shimmering line across the sea. The hum beneath the ground returned, softer now, like a farewell. The sand around him rippled with faint blue spirals that faded as the tide advanced. The water reached the edge of the forest and paused there, as if bowing to it. Takeshi felt the world around him breathe in perfect balance, sea, land, and sky connected through one quiet rhythm. He turned inland. The mountain was dark again, its outline barely visible against the stars. The island had fallen silent, not from emptiness, but from completion. The lights on the water drifted farther until they became one with the night. Takeshi stood there until dawn, the sea touching his feet, the horizon glowing with the last of the lanterns. He felt no fear, no weight of survival. He had seen the island remember itself, had heard it sing. Whatever came next would only be another verse in the same endless song. When the first light of morning touched the waves, the last lantern sank below the surface, leaving the ocean calm and silver. Takeshi closed his eyes, whispering a final prayer for those who had walked beside him. The wind carried it across the water, merging it with the sound of the sea. The island exhaled one last time, and the air grew still. When morning broke, the island seemed smaller. The water had risen high enough to cover the low valleys, leaving only the ridge lines and the mountain's crown above the tide. Takeshi walked along the new shore, a thin border of wet stone and broken roots where jungle once grew. The air shimmered with warmth, but there was no sound of birds, no insects. Only the whisper of waves brushing against stone. The sand underfoot glittered faintly, filled with fragments of shell and glass that caught the sun. Each glint reminded him of the lanterns from the night before, now vanished beneath the sea. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, yet he knew it would not last. The island was sinking into its own memory, returning everything it had borrowed from the living world. He found what remained of an old bunker, half buried in coral. Its walls were covered with carving sprawls, eyes and marks that might once have been words. Inside lay rusted helmets and broken rifles fused into the stone, as if swallowed and digested by time. He sat among them and listened. The silence felt kind, not empty. It carried a sense of rest, as though every sound of war had been erased. He reached into his pocket and drew out the carving he had carried since the shrine beneath the roots. The pattern glowed softly in the dim light, pulsing once with each heartbeat. The island was still alive within it, a single thread connecting him to everything he had seen. He placed it gently on the ground and bowed his head. "I understand now," he whispered. "You remember, so we can forget." A breeze moved through the bunker, lifting dust from the floor. The spirals on the walls shimmered briefly, then wasted, their lines dissolving into the stone. The hum that had followed him for so long was gone. The island had gone quiet again, completely still, as if it had finished speaking. Takeshi walked back to the beach. The horizon burned gold under the rising sun. The mountain stood behind him, its peak reflected in the calm sea. He realized the reflection was clearer than the mountain itself, as if the real island existed now beneath the water. The world above was only shadow. He knelt at the edge of the tide, touching the surface with his fingertips. The water was warm, alive with faint vibration. It felt like a pulse, slow and steady, echoing from deep below. For the first time, he did not resist. He let the rhythm move through him, washing away the last traces of fear. From the distance came the call of a single bird, thin and uncertain. It circled above the new coastline, crying once before disappearing into the light. The sound left a trace of hope, fragile yet real. Perhaps not everything had been taken. Perhaps the island had left a piece of itself behind, to begin again. Takeshi sat until the sun stood high, the sea shining around him. He thought of the men who had vanished, of the giants walking into the waves, of the mountain dreaming beneath its crown of cloud. All of it was memory now, drifting through the endless water. He smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the world grow lighter. The tide rose to his knees, then to his waist. He closed his eyes and whispered a quiet farewell. The sea answered with silence, calm and infinite. When he opened his eyes again, the bunker was gone. The beach had flattened, smooth as glass. Only the faint spirals in the sand remained, glowing briefly before fading with the tide. The tide had risen to the cliffs. What was once forest now floated beneath a thin veil of silver water. Takeshi stood at the highest point, watching the sea absorb the island piece by piece. The air was clear and strangely bright, filled with drifting mist that caught the sunlight like glass dust. Every ripple below reflected the sky, erasing the line between earth and heaven. He walked along the ridge until the stone ended in a narrow ledge that jutted out above the waves. There, the water shimmered in slow spirals, the same pattern carved into every corner of the island. He felt it calling again, not as a voice this time, but as a steady pull, soft and patient. The sea no longer threatened, it invited. He stepped down expecting to sink. The surface held him. It was firm yet yielding, cool beneath his bare feet. Light radiated from below, forming circles around each step. He took another, and the water rippled outward, but did not break. The hum returned, rising through his bones, the same rhythm that had guided him through jungle, storm, and silence. It felt like a heartbeat not his own, but shared. Takeshi walked farther, the shore receding behind him. The sea glowed in every direction, a field of pale light stretching toward the horizon. Beneath the surface he could see shapes moving slowly, vast and peaceful. Giants, perhaps, or the island itself shifting in sleep. Their forms flickered like memories half recalled. He sensed no danger, only belonging. The air shimmered with soundless music. He thought of the letters he had written, but never sent, of the faces that had vanished into fog, of the mountain that had breathed beneath the earth. All of it gathered inside him, like tide meeting shore. He understood now that nothing had been lost. The island had simply remembered everything in its own way, and now it was returning that memory to the sea. The light around him brightened until the world seemed made of water and ski alone. He stopped walking. Ahead, where the horizon curved into mist, a single figure waited tall, still, glowing faintly blue. It raised its hand in greeting, the gesture slow and calm. Takeshi lifted his own in return. Their reflections met upon the water, merging into one. A breeze passed between them, carrying the scent of rain and smoke, of soil and home. The figure turned, walking farther out, its steps leaving trails of light that floated on the surface before fading. Takeshi followed without thought. With every step, the weight of his body lessened until the sea held him as gently as air. The island behind him disappeared, swallowed by its own reflection. He looked down and saw not his shadow, but countless others beneath the water, marching in ceased harmony. They were the men he had lost, walking through light toward some unseen shore. He smiled faintly. The fear that had once filled his chest was gone. What remained was quiet recognition. The horizon began to glow brighter, white and gold, until he could no longer distinguish the water from the sky. The hum within him slowed, merging with the rhythm of the waves. He closed his eyes and let the sound carry him forward. When he opened them again, the sea was calm. There was no figure ahead, no island behind, only endless light. His footprints drifted on the surface a moment longer before dissolving into ripples. Somewhere beneath that boundless glow, the island dreamed on, and the memory of a man walking across its water became part of its song. The light lingered on the horizon, neither dawn nor dusk. Takeshi stood within it, surrounded by water that no longer felt wet. The world had narrowed to silence and reflection. Beneath his feet, faint ripples shimmered with a rhythm slower than breath. Somewhere below, the island's voice murmured not a sound carried by air, but a thought unfolding through the sea itself. He listened. The voice was vast and patient. It spoke in images rather than words. The coast before the war, children playing under palms, fishermen lighting fires along the shore. Then the flash of gunfire, the ships, the endless nights of rain. All of it returned in a single pulse, stripped of anger and fear. The island was not accusing. It was remembering. Takeshi knelt, letting his hand rest on the surface. The water grew warm under his palm. He felt the vibration rise through his arm, traveling straight to his heart. The hum carried new tones now somber, almost human. Within them, he heard fragments of familiar voices, each fading gently into the next. The lieutenant's command, the coast watcher's warning, the laughter of soldiers before battle, the whisper of his wife's song. He whispered back, unsure if he spoke to them or to himself. "I hear you." The sea answered with a single deep note that spread outward across the horizon. The sky dimmed slightly, as though taking a breath. The voice continued, calm and clear inside his head. Everything that is spoken becomes water. Everything remembered becomes light. He closed his eyes and saw the spirals once more, not carved in stone this time, but forming from pure brightness, swirling outward until they filled his vision. Each line held the memory of a moment, footsteps through mud, the crackle of a dying radio. The first time he saw the giants moving through mist. The lines spread beyond the sea, crossing into Skiamati, into time, into whatever waited beyond both. The water beneath him began to move again, lifting gently once. It was not a wave, but a breath, carrying him upward. He felt weightless, neither standing nor floating, suspended in the rhythm of the island's final song. The light around him deepened into gold, then silver, then something beyond color. The voice spoke one last time, fading as it did. "We keep what is given. We release what is learned." He thought of the letter buried in the sand, the carving left behind, the countless footsteps swallowed by rain. All of it remained somewhere within this living memory. He smiled, knowing it no longer mattered whether anyone found them. The story had already been absorbed. The horizon brightened once more. From its center rose a single column of light, stretching upward like a bridge between sea and sky. The water stilled, reflecting it perfectly. Takeshi felt the pull of it, gentle yet absolute. The hum within his chest matched its tone. He took a slow breath and whispered, "I am ready." The sea replied with silence that was neither empty nor final, only vowels. The light enveloped him, dissolving the shape of his body until he was indistinguishable from the ocean around him. The island exhaled one final sigh, soft as wind through leaves, and the world settled into stillness. Far below, where the mountain once dreamed, a new sound began, faint, curious, the echo of footsteps returning through water. The sea calmed until it no longer moved. Clouds drifted slowly across a sky washed clean of color. The light that had filled the horizon dimmed into soft gray, leaving the world suspended between day and night. Beneath the surface, the island rested again, its vast body settling into silence. The hum that had once carried through every root and stone faded into a steady heartbeat, quiet enough to be mistaken for peace. From that silence rose memory. Not voice, not names, only sensations. Rain cooling hot skin, the smell of wet leaves, the distant cry of a bird that no longer existed. The island remembered all of it. It remembered the giants who walked into the sea, the soldiers who vanished in fog, the songs whispered through radios that never truly stopped. It remembered Takeshi standing at its heart, listening with the patience of one who had finally stopped running. Somewhere above the water, a small wave rippled outward. It carried with it a piece of the mountain, a single stone worn smooth by time. The stone drifted until it reached open ocean, then sank slowly, leaving behind a faint trail of light. That light did not fade. It traveled across the water, spreading in thin lines until the sea itself seemed to breathe again. The island had not died. It had exhaled. In distant waters, sailors would one day see a strange glow rising from beneath the waves. They would speak of it as a ghost current, a path of blue fire winding through the Pacific. None would know it was the island dreaming, remembering the lives it had once carried. None would know the story of the man who walked across its surface, who learned its language, and left no trace but understanding. Yet the island would know. That was enough. Deep within what had been its mountain, the great statue slept once more, its face turned toward the ocean. The carvings across its chest pulsed faintly in rhythm with the sea. Each spiral shone with the memory of a life, a word, a breath. For the island, there was no end, only stillness between songs. If anyone ever found the letter buried in the sand, the paper would be blank, the ink drawn away by water. But when held to light, faint lines would appear, shapes that twisted into spirals, each one whispering a voice too quiet to hear. The reader would feel warmth under their fingers, as if the words still breathed. They might think it imagination. The island would smile in its sleep. Far above, clouds gathered and parted. The first light of a new dawn spread across the endless sea. The glow on the horizon shimmered, revealing the faint outline of land where none should be. For a single moment, the island surfaced again, not as earth or stone, but as memory made visible. It lingered, gleaming gold, then sank peacefully back into the deep. And in that stillness, a single whisper crossed the water, not from the living, not from the dead, but from the space between them. We are remembered. The sea carried the whisper until it vanished into the sky. Then the island slept,